back to Book Buzz with Jen and Payne, a podcast where we discuss everything about romance books. Today, we have the pleasure of having Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestselling author Giana Darling with us, and we're going to be discussing everything about her books and more.
Hi. Hi, Giana. So how are you doing today?
I'm well. I'm super excited to be talking to you too. I've been looking forward to this all week, and I've been getting ready for release, and this has been like the carrot at the end of my stick, my reward for working hard all week.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. We were so nervous. With every author interviews, we said, okay, we got this, but we always end up being very nervous.
No.
Like I'm literally shaking.
Oh my gosh, no, don't shake. I am like the least intimidating person, I think, in the world. So don't be stressed out. We're just gonna hang out. It'll be great.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll start off with how we got into reading your books. And I believe my first book I start reading from you is The Enslaved Duet. And then I went into, because I remember I was asking tons of people for recommendations on age gaps. And of course, everyone recommended Welcome to the Dark Side. And then I read Welcome to the Dark Side. There's something about your books that I always want to put off because I get really scared reading it. And then I always end up picking it up and loving it. Because Lessons in Corruption, King and Cressida, I love age gaps, but somehow I don't like it. I don't really like it when the woman is older than the hero.
A lot of people don't like that. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So I did not plan on picking up Lessons in Corruption, but when you announced that After the Fall is going to be their book again, I was like, you know what? I really have to pick up the first book. So I went and picked it up. I loved it. Oh my gosh. King. I always, I'm undecided if I love Zeus more or if I love King more, because King is just he's so poetic and romantic, but Zeus is such a big, huge teddy bear. So yeah.
They're both very romantic.
Yes. And then I was honestly not gonna pick up the Evolution of Sin trilogy, but I have to read it because I want to know the background of Elena. So I have to read it. And then I ended up loving it so much. It's so wrong, but it's so right.
That's just the best thing to hear, though, because I don't typically write things that make people comfortable. And that's something that I'm just drawn towards, is kind of pushing people's boundaries when they read. And so honestly, I get so much out of it when I hear a reader being like, I took a chance on your book. I would never want to read this. This is not something I condone in real life. And just to say, I don't condone shooting in real life either. But it is kind of interesting to see people push their boundaries, and then it's so rewarding to have people enjoy when that happens. So I really appreciate you taking a chance on some of my books that you wouldn't normally have read. That means a lot.
Yeah. Well, they're all good. I loved all of your books.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
I picked up your books because of Payne, because she kept editing for it, and I kept seeing your covers everywhere. And I remember I loved your Fallen Man covers a lot. So I have them all. Well, some, because I read some already. I had them in my TBR, but I'm not an age gap person. It has to be like a certain author that I know. So I was like it's in Payne. Is like, pick it up. It's, it's very good. I was like, but it's age gap. And then like Payne said, for me, it's tricky to read a book where the female is older than the hero. So I ended up picking up The Enslaved Duet first, which I was obsessed. I remember I read that, like, both of them back to back, like in less than 2 days.
Wow. Those are big books too.
Because I couldn't put it down, and I didn't sleep like the whole night when I first picked up the first one. Because I would text Payne. I was like, oh my God, so what's going to happen? She's like, I'm not going to tell you. So I was like, okay. So I went and picked up the Lessons of Corruption. and it was phenomenal. I loved it. I was like, why did I wait so long to pick this up?
I love
it's like
that.
King was, I remember I texted him, I was like, first of all, he is so mature that I'm like, why wasn't someone like this in my high school? And there's something about it. So and then I started reading Sue's book. And like I told you, I'm not a big age gap, but there's something about the way you write it that it draws you into their story, and you forget that there's an age gap, and you get so hooked into their story and into their journey of seeing what they're going through, their lessons that they're learning with us as we were reading the books. So I loved it, and I was like, I can't believe it took me that long to pick up this book, this series.
That makes me so happy. I can't even express how happy that makes me, because especially when you're saying that you kind of grow and learn with the characters. For me, I actually recently took a test, a personality test kind of thing. And they tell you your top 5 strengths, your kind of characteristics. And my number 1 was context, which is interesting. So context as in like the history of something and wanting to understand where something has come from and their motivation and their journey. And I thought that was really funny, because when I write books, usually it's kind of the stories are quite epic. Like they take place over a longer period of time. Some of them, like the age gaps, start when they're young, and you can really see the evolution of their relationship. And I love doing that. So to hear you say that you also found that mimicked in those books makes me really happy, because I love kind of starting at the beginning of the story and fleshing out so that it isn't as uncomfortable for people, so that you can kind of see how this very peculiar relationship would start, like with a 19-year age gap. How in the world are you going to make that seem normal? And so I went back to the beginning, because that's kind of a big part of my storytelling process, is going back to the beginning. So that's very cool that you found that.
And I think you're the only author that I read age gaps now from.
Really? Wow, what an honor.
Because it's hard for me. And it's like what Pang said, it's like, it takes everything in me to pick up an age gap book. Wow. But I don't know, I love the Fallen Men series.
What is it about the age gap that just makes you kind of iffy?
I don't know. I think for me, it's more of I don't know.
Okay, fair enough.
But I did find that like your series, and then there's a different book that it took everything in me to pick up, and I ended up loving it.
Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas, maybe?
I did read that one though. But after that,
that's a classic like age gap people read. And it's a good intro, because it's not dark or anything. Like it's actually quite sweet.
Yes. Yeah. I read that one. I didn't know that was an age gap when I picked it up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
it's a pretty intense age gap too.
I know. I was like, no, but yeah. So you're like literally right now, you're the only author that I read age gaps from.
Oh, I love that. I don't, honestly, it's so funny. If you had asked me before I began my writing journey, if I would be known for writing age gaps, also be known for writing motorcycle club romances, I would probably have laughed at you, because it's interesting kind of what happens as you start writing. You are unconsciously drawn to these certain topics and tropes and kind of subject matters. And I think I'd written like 5 books, maybe, I think 5 books before I realized, hey, all of them have been age gap. You clearly have something for age gap. But it wasn't like I set out deliberately to write age gap books. And even with the Fallen Men series, all of them are age gaps. The next one, book 7, is an age gap. But again, it wasn't necessarily like I sat down and was like, this has to be an age gap. But it's just, sometimes authors are drawn to certain things, and clearly that dynamic I find really interesting. So
what is it about age gaps that you love writing?
I think it's a number of things. One is I'm drawn to the forbidden. Like, I'm really interested in kind of, why does society think the way that it is? Why do we create these boundaries around certain topics? And why is that? And how can I dismantle that in my head and in the reader's head, so that we're comfortable with something that we were basically raised to think is uncomfortable. That kind of dynamic is kind of what fuels my writing process. Like, those are the kind of what if questions that I ask myself. And that's how, by asking those questions, I get the story ideas. So forbidden is in general what I go for. And I think with age gap, I was raised an only child by my single mother and my two grandparents. And so I grew up watching, like, I don't know if you've heard of the show Frasier, but it was like about a psychiatrist in Seattle. That was my favorite show growing up. I was like a 6-year-old girl, and my favorite show was about a psychiatrist living in the city, you know, like I definitely, you know, I was reading Jane Austen with my grandparents when I was a kid. Like, I just was raised kind of like an old person. And I think for me, because of that relationship, I was always drawn to older people, and I always have my whole life. Like, some of my best friends are teachers that I had in high school. And I just was always drawn to older people, I think, because of the circumstances of being of how I was raised. And so age has never been the same for me. It's more fluid. Like, I don't care if someone's 40, if they're interesting and if we connect on an interesting level, then like I would date a 40-year-old. I think my biggest age gap I've ever had was when I was 19. I dated someone who was 36. And that was a pretty big age gap. Yeah. But we just connected. We had a lot in common. And it didn't actually feel to me like I wasn't attracted to him because he was so much older. I was attracted to who he was as a person. And to me, the age didn't matter. So I think that's kind of why it's not even that I'm necessarily writing age gaps, because like I really love age gaps. My boyfriend is 16 days older than me, and I've been with him for forever, you know, so clearly it's not something that in real life I'm necessarily like, must be an age gap. But I just think age doesn't really matter to me. And I also think if you look at other relationships in my books, like Cressida and Zeus, you know, their relationship is so close and they're so tight. And there's an age gap there, but they're like best friends. I just don't think age matters to me kind of in general. And that transcribes to my books as like, I don't really think it matters if he's 13 years older or if she's 8 years older. If two people have a connection, that's pretty rare. And I don't think that it should be stymied just because there's an age gap.
And I'm glad you said that, because I would say that when I was reading Zeus' book, it was, I was like, okay, how is this going to be? He's like so much older than her. But once you're reading, you're like, oh my God, like I love him. And the way he is like, he's so soft. And even like when we would see him in Lessons of Corruption, it's like I told Payne, I was like, I love him. Like, he is this softy but badass who he is so protective. And so it's like I told you, it's when I started reading the book, you start forgetting the age gap and you start focusing on their love story and the way they are and just how they're growing within the book.
And that's my goal. So that just feels so good to hear that, because it's about their personalities. It's about the connection that they're forming. It's not about like the forbidden aspect of it is actually not important. That's what I'm kind of trying to say in these books, is that yes, there's a forbidden element. There probably will be in all of my books forevermore, but I'm not trying to focus on the forbidden. I'm actually trying to break open the forbidden and show you that it's actually a really natural, beautiful relationship that's taking place. So it's nice to hear that about. And I think with Welcome to the Dark Side, it was such a unique relationship development, you know, like he saved her life. And that, of course, is incredibly bonding. And so you kind of think about, of course, a 6-year-old would be like, this guy just saved my life. He's my hero. He's a real life hero. So I'm going to be kind of like obsessed with knowing about him. And, you know, I want to take care of him too, because in your child's mind, you don't really have any of those boundaries, that you haven't learned those yet. So she quite innocently just took to him. He saved her life. He was really nice to her. She was worried about him. And for the first time in her life, someone was worried about her. And it's actually such a genuine, pure way that the relationship starts. And I kind of, that was intentional. You know, you can have a relationship that changes as it grows. It's totally normal. Lots of relationships do change. So, yeah.
I love that. I love it.
Yeah. So on this topic about writing, I know you've mentioned of how you got into writing, that since when you were a little kid, you love writing. So can you give us a little bit more background of how you actually really got into writing your first book?
Sure. So like The Affair.
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. So yes, I've been writing since I was 8 years old. I did my first creative writing project in a massive paper pumpkin when I was 8, and then it was just game over. I loved writing. And I always wanted to be a writer, but I grew up with a single mom who was quite focused on financial security because she was a single mother. So she was not about me writing, and she taught me to always have a plan, like, a more secure backup plan, which I still think to this day is completely fair. Writing is a very difficult career to make a go of. So I had, I actually conceived of the idea for The Affair when I was 16 years old. And I'd kind of tinkered around. I started to write the book, and then I kind of abandoned it. And I went to university, didn't study creative writing. And I graduated with my undergrad, and my mother really wanted me to go to law school. That was her dream for me my whole life, was Giana's going to be a lawyer. Giana's going to be a lawyer. She would tell everyone. And before I went, I just thought, oh, I'm going to be so upset with myself if I don't take a chance on my dream.
Yeah.
So I spent, I think, 3 months writing The Affair, doubting myself, agonizing over it. And then I didn't tell anyone, not a single soul. I looked up actually, Corinna Halley was one of my favorite indie romance authors at the time. So I looked up who her cover designer was, and I contacted them. I got the cover made. Again, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't have any friends in the industry or anything. And then I just randomly released The Affair. And I think I'd found a beta reader on Goodreads through a group. So I had a beta reader. And I think I offered some arcs in like a Goodreads group as well, but very few, maybe like 5. And I didn't think anything was going to happen. And it didn't really. Like, some people did find the book, which I don't know. I still don't know how they did that. And then I wrote the second one, and I published it like probably 4 months later. And I also started a group on Facebook, Giana Darling. I just saw that people had done that. And I was like, why not? And somehow, again, with like no PR or no anything, I didn't know at all what I was doing. I got a few readers, and it wasn't enough to make me, necessarily completely change my life, because I wasn't supporting myself or by any means. Like, a few people were reading my book. It wasn't that exciting, but it kind of gave me the confidence to continue to pursue that dream. And I actually ended up not going to law school. I did my master's in creative writing instead. And by the time, and then when I graduated, I was still focused on other writing journeys that I thought would be a little bit maybe more practical. And at that point, I had The Evolution of Sin, and I was wondering if I was going to continue on with romance writing. I was a food journalist at that point, and I moved to Europe to do a food trip. And I was like, you know what? I just want to try to really, I'm going to give myself 6 months of really going at the romance thing, and we'll see if it goes. And in those 6 months, I released Lessons in Corruption and Welcome to the Dark Side. And that was when my whole life changed. And that was when I was like, okay. And my goal actually was to come home from my trip, because I moved to Europe for 10 months, was to come home from that trip and be able to support myself writing, whether that was with romance writing or with the food journalism. And at the end, I came home and I could support myself as a romance author. So that was pretty cool.
What made you, because I seriously think your Fallen Men series is so unique. How did you even come up with that idea of the MC world?
I think some of that uniqueness comes from the fact that I am not a biker babe. So I think that I actually read a bad review once of the Fallen Men series, and I thought it was I thought it was fair in a way. And I kind of thought of it as a compliment. They said, like, this is not a typical MC romance. Like, it's written so like fluff, like, it's so prosy and, it's not like that dark and the men aren't that rough. And it was kind of saying that it was maybe like a little bit too classy almost for a MC romance. And I was like, okay, I totally can live with that. That's fine. Hardcore MC. I actually didn't write that series for hardcore MC readers. I wrote it because I had this idea, and it wasn't about the motorcycle club. It was about this family that I conceived of King and Zeus and Harley Rose. Yeah. And so I think when I set out to write it, it wasn't like I set out to write an epic MC romance series. I just set out to tell this story I had. And that story, Lessons in Corruption, was 100% based. This has never happened before to this extent, but I saw a picture of Christopher Mason leaning on a motorcycle, and he was against a chain link fence, and he was looking kind of over his shoulder. And I just thought his gaze looked like he was waiting for his lover to join him on the back of the bike so that they could take off, into the sunset. And immediately I knew, like, his name came to me. I knew it was King Kyle Garrow. I knew that he was a student and he was going to have an affair with his teacher because he was this confident, full of swagger 18-year-old who somehow thinks that it's his right to date a much older woman. And like, why wouldn't she want him? And then really swiftly on the heels of having King, I had Zeus and Harley Rose. And I knew their stories pretty quick. It honestly, that's kind of how storytelling happens to me. I kind of conceive of this idea, and then there's a domino effect. Like all of these people kind of show up in my head, one after the other. And so actually within, like, I think a week of just thinking about Lessons in Corruption, I actually had 10 books in the Fallen Men series, like loosely plotted. I knew who the characters were going to be that had their stories, what their titles were going to be for their books, who the antagonist or what the conflict was going to be, and who they would end up with for these 10 books. So that's kind of how the Fallen MC arrived at where it is.
And how much research did you do to write that series? Because there's some, like, the way they talk, and because I'm a huge Sons of Anarchy fan. Like, I love that show. So it's like the way they talk, it's somehow the way that, when you're reading it, you're like, I can hear it. Like, you can hear it. So how much research did you do to setting that world up to where, they still have that tone? And I know you said you wrote it in a more romantic sense, but you still get that vibe and you hear the MC in them.
Well, I really appreciate that. I think some of it, it's kind of this strange juxtaposition for me when I'm writing. I do tons of research for my books. So Lessons in Corruption, like just the MC aspect, I watched some documentaries on Netflix. I ordered a bunch of autobiographies and biographies of bikers, from the Hells Angels, from there's a ton of them that I ordered, and I read their stories, and I kind of saw what was important to them and the cadence of their tone. And also a lot of my conflict, like the shootouts or the whatever, they are kind of based on similar things that I have read or seen, like I try to make it not totally outlandish. Like this could happen and has happened to an MC before. So yeah, I do a lot of research, but then the kind of funny thing is I black out when I write. Like I really just sit down at the keyboard and I just zone out into this world. And so it's funny because I wouldn't say that I'm consciously making decisions when I'm in that space. It's just my subconscious. I let free, I let the beast out, and the beast writes the book. And then when I kind of come out of it and I read what I wrote, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that I was writing that. It's kind of a strange, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation where a different Giana takes over. So even though I do tons of research, and a lot of the time I'll have like a loose idea of where things are going, or I'll have something I want to incorporate. Really, that doesn't always end up being the case. Like I stopped plotting quite a long time ago because there was no point. I would just, writer Giana would change her mind. So there's lots of research, but I think it kind of I do it before I start writing, and then it informs my writing in a way that I don't really consciously know, if that makes sense.
Which book has been the one that you've done more research on and has been the hardest?
The hardest, like the hardest to write or the hardest to research for?
Hardest to research for.
I think When Heroes Fall, my mafia romance, I was just so obsessed with getting mafia right. Like my family's Italian and I love the Italian culture. And I really wanted there to be, like I don't actually really read MC or mafia romances, but I've read some mafia romances before, and I was always sad that there wasn't more cultural aspects to it. Like, why are they like this? And they have such a rich culture of customs and like food and dance and all of these things. So I really wanted to incorporate a lot of elements of that. I really wanted it to seem kind of authentically Italian. And I really wanted to know what the mafia was about. And I learned so much that I kind of thought, okay, I ordered a few books online about the mafia, and then I read them. And then I was like, but that just made me have so many questions. So then I ordered more. And then I watched some documentaries. And also in When Heroes Fall, the whole premise is a lawyer and a client. So it wasn't just like I was doing normal mafia. I also had to do legal stuff. I had to do a lot of legal research to figure out, well, what happens to a mafioso when they're on trial? How are they tried? What is the process? How would a lawyer go about this? And I'm also not American, and this is set in America. So what I know of the legal system in Canada has no bearing on the story. So I did a lot of research. I had a lot of like experts that I talked to, like about the legal side of things for When Heroes Fall. And yeah, so definitely that one was the most research, but I also wouldn't say that it was hard. It was really fascinating. And I did my undergraduate in history and English literature. So I love to research. And, you know, I said one of my biggest traits is context. So the research is part of the fun bit for me. Like I love doing that for my books. I don't think I ever would begrudge that process. It's really fun.
Do you try to have your research done before you write the book, or do you do the research and then do some more while you're writing the book?
Typically, I have like a period of time where my friend Ella Fields and I call it like the marinating process, where you have this idea for the book and you kind of, it's in the back of your head and you're feeding into it. It's like a sourdough starter, maybe. You keep feeding into this idea by researching, by just having it in the back of your head as you go throughout your day. And you have these little things, like you might be at a coffee shop and you might see someone and they're speaking in a certain way. And you're like, oh, okay. And then in the book, you have this character who speaks that certain way, because your brain is just kind of open to feedback for this story before you start writing it, if that makes sense. So during that period, that's when I try to do a ton of research. You know, actually reading books and whatever, because I don't have time to read books when I'm writing. When I'm writing, I do often have a moment where I kind of pull myself out of writing and I'll be like, I need to know, you know, how they drink espresso in Naples. And I'll look up how they drink espresso in Naples, like something kind of random like that. I do quite a bit, because again, I really just love those little details. They're probably not important to anyone but me, but I really enjoy them. So I will pull myself out of writing to kind of look those things up. Or like there's a lot of Italian, so I have to, you know, look up the proper way to say something.
So you did mention a little bit about that negative review of how they talk about the MC world. So how do you deal with negative reviews for your books?
It's a really good question. You know, I think every author is a bit of a masochist because you're an artist. So you're creating art and you want to know what people think of your art. But as an artist, you're also incredibly sensitive. Like sometimes I do read bad reviews and I'm like, do you know that this author is a human being? Because I think sometimes people just don't care. They just don't think that an author is a human being. And in fact, authors are very human and they're very emotional. That's usually what makes an author a good author, is that they can really be in touch with their emotions. So sometimes they can be absolutely eviscerating. And when I was first writing, I definitely read all of my reviews all the time. And I don't necessarily think that's bad advice for someone who's just starting out, because you want to see how people are reacting. And sometimes in bad reviews, there's something that you should learn. Like they really didn't like that, you know, every 2 seconds you had someone was shrugging, you know, or someone winked like every other page. You know, that's something that, okay, you didn't notice you did that, but that's good to know, and you can take that moving forward. Now I definitely try not to read. I honestly don't read my reviews that much. I'd say that I read my reviews from my ARC team. And like when I send out ARCs to bloggers and things, because I want to see, it's like a test audience. You want to see how your book's going to be received. And then typically the first week of release, I might read my reviews on Amazon just to see kind of, again, what's going on, how are people enjoying it. After that, I try not to, although sometimes I slip down a rabbit hole and I'm like in a particular mood where I want to lacerate myself, and I'll go and I'll read only the bad reviews, actually. I won't read the good reviews, because for me personally, I love to write. I've been writing my whole life. It is just such a natural part of who I am and what I would be doing even if I couldn't make a living out of it. So I love my craft. I like what I produce. And I think at the end of the day, that's the most important thing for any author. I love what I write. So when I put it out into the world, I don't have anxiety about it. Like if someone likes it, that makes me really happy. If no one likes it, I would still be like, okay, well, I did my best. I enjoyed that process. Like this was important to me. So the bad reviews, and as you keep writing, you get more and more confidence. So I think the bad reviews now don't hurt me as much as they used to. And I enjoy reading them because I think it's important to understand that your book isn't going to be for everyone, you know? And I used to be upset about reviews, like, for example, The Affair is about, as you might guess from the title, an affair. And it used to bother me because people would write reviews being like, cheating's awful, I hate affairs. And I was like, the book is called The Affair. What did you think it was about? And I used to get so upset, like, should I have made it more clear? I mean, it's in the blurb, it's in the title. I used to get so upset. But then I was like, it doesn't even matter, because it's one of the amazing parts about art and about reading is that someone can have a completely different experience reading your book than another person. Someone can think it's absolute garbage and they wish that they could burn it. And someone can be moved completely and have it actually change their life in some way. And you can't really understand the beauty of one without understanding the beauty of the other, you know? So I kind of think there's always going to be, you know, checks and balances. There's always going to be a negative and a positive, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. So I kind of take it more intellectually now, whereas before I used to cry, like for sure. I used to cry if I read my bad reviews. But now I'm like, okay, clearly people like my books. If I'm able to make a living on my books and I love them, that makes me happy. That's enough for me. You can't expect everyone to like you, just like you can't expect everyone to like all your books, you know?
Yeah. But I think that's a good way of thinking too, though, because I mean, like you said, you're doing what you love. And I think once you're in that mindset, everything's easier. I mean, not everybody's gonna like the same book. It's like me and Payne have discussed it before. Like what we like might not be somebody else's cup of tea. But I mean, and it's fine. It's okay. But I mean, people should not judge before you read it.
Well, I think there's that. And also, actually, I'm going to butcher her name. Nicole Fiorina, I think her name is. She wrote Hollow Heathens. And she's an author. Anyway, she wrote a post the other day that I came across. I'm not even, you know, close with her or anything, but I saw it. And she was talking about how someone had left a review of her book that said it was bad. And she took umbrage with that because she said, art is not bad. Art is subjective. So you might not have had a good experience reading that book, but that doesn't mean it's bad, because there are other people who will have a different opinion. So to unequivocally say something is bad when it's subjective doesn't really work. And I agree with that to a certain extent. Like sometimes, you know, the reviews that are like, this was laughable and trash, and this writer should go and never write again. And, you know, things like that. I think actually that says more about the reviewer than it does about the author. You don't need to take that personally. But I think there's a certain kernel of truth to what this author was saying. Everyone has a different experience. And so it's fine if you don't like the book, but I do think it's important to be respectful. Someone you know, I'm obviously an author, so I'm closer to it, but even any kind of art, even if I watch a movie that I don't like, I'm like, okay, well, this was this artist's experience. This is what they wanted to tell. I didn't personally enjoy it, but I'm not going to think that they're a jerk or that they're a terrible person or that they're even bad at their craft. They told the story that they wanted to tell, and I just didn't have the reaction that they were hoping for. And that is just a natural cycle of art and feedback. And it's okay, but no one has to be a dick about it. You know?
I don't about it. I don't read reviews before. Like if I have like on Goodreads, if I find a book that I want to read, I used to go to the reviews. I don't do the reviews anymore. And I think when me and Ping have mentioned it before, I think it's like you said, I want to experience it on my own, because maybe what people don't like, I'm going to love. And it's happened before. So it's like, I forgot, I read a book to where people were mad about it. I read it and I was like, oh my God, I freaking loved it.
And I love that. I think that's so cool. And I do that too. Like I used to read reviews before I used to read a book a day for like most of my life. Like I was an insane reader of any kind of genre. It didn't even matter. And I used to read reviews, and what I would do is you see the book cover. So you judge it on that, let's be honest, of course. And then you read the blurb and you judge it on that. And a lot of the time I would want to read that book just based on the cover and the blurb, which is kind of how it's supposed to be. That's what the author's hoping for. You read the blurb and you look at the cover. But then I would go and read reviews. And even if I was really interested in reading the book, I found that if I was reading those reviews, it would deter me from reading it. And I didn't like that, because I felt like I was already having a positive experience with that book. And yeah, it might not turn out great, but I was already identifying with it and already wanting to get deeper. And I let other people's thoughts deter me from something that I wanted to do, which is ridiculous. So I actually, I stopped doing that. And I just went based on if I was interested in a book or not.
Yes.
And it led me to read lots more books that I think I would have, like it made my boundaries bigger.
And I like that you said about the cover part. So if I like a cover, most likely I'll pick up the book, because it's something about the cover that draws you, not just the blurb, but the cover. I think the cover does a lot if a reader picks up a book or not. Do you personally aim for your covers being a certain way?
I do. I am incredibly visual, probably to the point of it being a flaw. I'm very aesthetically minded. So I am obsessed with my covers, and I actually usually have my covers done well in advance of even writing the book. So for example, I'm just designing the next Fallen Men book cover right now. And that's not going to be out till next year. I have the first book in Sebastian's trilogy, that cover done. And I have for I think a year. So I'm so visual that actually visuals are the building blocks of my process. Like my Pinterest boards are always super insane. I have 1,000 pins for a book. And I think, so for me, the visual engagement with my book is the first thing that a reader is going to have, right? They're going to look at my cover first. So I want to make sure that the aesthetic that I'm giving off is incredibly appropriate to what I've written inside, and hopefully engaging enough, captivating enough that they then read the blurb and then they read the book. So yes, I obsess over my covers. For When Heroes Fall and When Villains Rise, I spent 2 years on the covers, trying to find the right images, trying to find the right formatting. I wanted it to be, and it's hard. One of the things that's really interesting about being an author, I kind of say there's two camps. There's the business person and there's the artist. And some people are great mixes of both too. This is kind of the spectrum that I'm talking about. And there are some things in covers that are just business smart. Maybe there's a font that's trending, and you should probably use that if you want to be business savvy or whatever. Or, abs on the cover are going to sell a ton, or, there's certain things that you should do. But then as an artist, you have your own vision too. So you kind of have to find out a good intersection of that. But for me, especially with my covers, I tend to be very creatively focused. So for When Heroes Fall, I knew it was a mafia romance, and typically mafia romance are black and white and red. That's typically the colors. And so people will see that and identify immediately, this is a mafia romance. And you do want that connotation, because you want them to know immediately if they love mafia romance or if they don't, that they can pick up this book or not. So I knew that I wanted those colors because that was business savvy, but creatively, I didn't want it to be the same kind of old shtick, like a black and white cover with like just the font in red or something like that. So for my process, I looked at a bunch of old movie posters of mafia movies and got really inspired by that. So actually the When Heroes Fall, which has a different kind of format than, a typical, like your typical romance cover, it was inspired by a poster of The Godfather, with like this text in the upper corner and this boundary around it. And for me, that was like, I needed that to happen. I needed it to have this specific vibe. I didn't care that it took me 2 years to find the right photos. Like, that's how important the visual representation of the book is to me. And that even extends to my teasers, my swag, like everything that I design for my books, I think about ad nauseum, because I do think it's important. And I think a lot of women are also very visually conscious, and that's a lot of my readers. So I do think it's an important part of the whole thing.
Well, I think your covers are very intriguing. That's the reason The Fallen Men were in my TBR. And I personally loved your The Evolution of Sin trilogy cover that you did. I thought it was it popped a lot.
Thank you.
And I think it's like Payne said, it's like, I wasn't that book. It took everything, because it was like, okay, it's like an affair. I'm like, what am I going to do? Like, I don't want to read it. But then I saw the cover. I was like, oh, I have to read it. Like, it's so pretty. Like, but each cover, and I think for me, what draws me to a cover, it's how intriguing it is. So it's like the cover tells a story already.
Yeah,
exactly. That's what it should do. Hopefully. Yes. And it's funny that you say that, because I was nervous about that cover, because it's not really a typical, the Evolution of Sin covers in general aren't very typical kind of romance covers, but it was the story to me. Like it was just so necessary. Like if someone didn't like it, then that was fine, because they probably wouldn't like the story. That was how emblematic of the romance I felt it was. So sometimes you have to take a risk and you have to do what you feel is right. And I think a lot of the time that also pays off. I think sometimes people get scared if they're not doing what everyone else is doing, it's not going to work out. But I think romance readers are also like very exploratory and very drawn to, there's a lot of romance readers are like prolific. You guys read so much that when you see something unique, I think you do stop and you're like, hey, what's this? It's cool.
I've gotten several books that I haven't read, but I got because of the cover.
Yeah.
Like the paperback.
I've done that too. Yeah. I've totally done that too.
I'll read it. Yes.
Yeah.
I was like, I'll read it soon, but let me get it so I can put it in my shelf so I can just show it off.
I haven't bought a paperback, even if I loved the book, because I didn't like the cover. I've also done that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Me too. I've done that. So the cover, I think, it affects a lot. Like for me, I go with the cover, the blurb. I don't do reviews anymore. I write them. I don't read them, because it's like I said, because what I like might not be everybody's cup of tea. Just like what others don't like, I might end up loving.
Yeah.
So I do think that I love the way you explained it, though, and I love the way that you're saying how you're doing what you personally want to do, because it's true. It's like, this is your art, this is what you're creating, and it's like you're showing us what's in your mind.
Exactly. That's the perfect way to say it.
And I love that. I think that's everybody should pick up every book of Giana's, because that's amazing.
You're so sweet.
So for your books, I know you spoke a little bit about The Fallen Men. You said that you already have a list of who's going to be a couple, their storyline, but do you do that with every book? Like, do you already know going into the book how that character story is going to go, or do you write is their story developed as you're writing the book?
That's such a good question. No, so basically my process is I have bare bones, and I have what I call creative ADD. I get ideas for books all of the time. Just all the time. So I actually have, I think, like, I counted about a year and a half ago, and I had 65 ideas in
Oh my
some form
gosh.
of like development. Yeah, crazy. And I've had more since then, so it's much more fun. So for me, it's kind of like I just need to, it's a matter of getting to them. But I always kind of have names are really important to me. So I usually have the characters' names. I have kind of a loose premise of how they met or what's going on there. And I usually have kind of a conflict. Because I really like having external conflict for my characters more than like miscommunications or whatever as the conflict. So I'll have those loose bones, very loose. And then I'll go in and I'll just start writing, because as I said before, even if I try to do a bit more than that, it changes, because when I get into the story, the characters are talking to me and they're telling me what their life story is. I'm kind of just like an autobiographer. So even if I try to make it go a certain way, it usually doesn't really work. So yeah, it's kind of the loose bones. With the Fallen Men series, it's a tiny bit different, because it's an interlocking series over time. And as you keep going, like now I'm going to be writing book 7. There's a lot that's happened. And there's actually stories that are still continuing through all of those that haven't finished yet. And that's deliberate, because it makes it to me seem more organic and more kind of like you're in this world if things aren't always resolved each book. Like there's some overhanging things that continue. So that means that not only do I have the bare bones for future books, but I also kind of have building blocks in each book. Like, for example, Lila and Nova in Inked in Lies. You see Nova and you hear about Nova and Lila's kind of strange friendship in, Lessons in Corruption, in Welcome to the Dark Side, in Good Gone Bad. And that actually evolves before their story's even actually told. And I love doing that, kind of like little breadcrumbs for Hansel and Gretel to follow. So I have to incorporate those elements as well. And so when I go into writing a book, I do have a sense in my mind of what's happened and what needs to happen in future books as well, which is very unique to the Fallen Men series, but also the Lombardi world. Like I knew that I was writing about this Lombardi family. And the evolution of sin overlaps with the enslaved duet, and the enslaved duet is like directly spawns the anti-heroes and love duet. So I do kind of always have an eye to the past and an eye to the future. And when I'm writing, I really like to connect. Like I don't have a standalone for a reason, because I really love to connect different worlds and explore different side characters and stuff. So apart from that loose foundation, I will also kind of have notes on what's going to happen and what's happened before. If that makes sense.
So for your characters, now that you mentioned it, how you add, little bits and pieces on other books. So for like the Fallen Men series, let's say you're in book 7 already. So how do you do it? Because I read some series to where you see the characters from the first couple of books, later on in the books, and it's like so many characters at once that you get, readers get confused sometimes. You're like, so many characters. So it's like your books does it in a way to where you're reading it, but you're not confused, to where you know who's who, and it's very well written to where, like I said, you know who's who, and it's not too much not too many characters at once, and you're not, because I read books like that to where I'm like, okay, who's this? And it's like so many like characters coming back to where you're lost. So how do you do it to where you plan it to where it's not too much for the reader to try to keep up?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I totally get it. Like in Game of Thrones, I remember reading them and being like, I need to have like a glossary of characters in front of my face at all times, because I don't remember at all. So obviously it's not quite that complicated, the Fallen Men series. But
see, that was me with The Hobbit. The Hobbit was who's who, what?
There was a lot of them in The Hobbit too. Like the group was bigger, and I totally understand that. So I think with the Fallen Men, for me, it's about the story that's happening. So I am not going to have every single character that's ever had a book be a predominant feature in every single book. It just doesn't make sense. And so I think that kind of helps with things. I'm not trying to shove down your throat, okay, well, all these previous characters had a book, and so now you have to catch up with them in every book, because that's not organic. You know, it's about the characters that are on their journey right now. So who's in their community? Who's important to them? Obviously, the whole club is important in every book. But, you know, if you think about, okay, so like in Lila's book, her community was Nova's family, the Booth family. And so that kind of took almost a little bit more than the Fallen Men family did. And the people that she was close to in the Fallen Men were Harley Rose. So we saw more of Harley Rose, you know, but then Harley Rose wasn't really in Dead Man Walking, for example, because Harley Rose isn't really that close to Bia. So it didn't make sense for me to just keep bringing these people up, or like making a point of giving them airtime when they're not important to the story that's happening right then. Usually there's, you know, 1 or 2 scenes where I try to have kind of everyone together, or have, you know, like a group scenario. But I think that's kind of the key, is if it's organic to what's happening between the 2 main characters, you can have other characters from before in the series crop up. But if it's not, then why bother bringing them into it? It's just going to be confusing. Like, why does a reader who's picking up Inked in Lies and hasn't read the rest of the books, why do they care about Harley Rose? You know, if she's not integral to the story, you know? So that's kind of how I do it. And I think that does help. But I also think I don't make that much of an effort to do it any which way. So you saying that is nice because I don't want it to be confusing. Someone did suggest a character glossary at the start of the books now, because there's so many of them. I've thought about it, but I probably won't do it. I don't know why, but I just don't want to. Maybe I will. If enough people say that they need it, then I will. But I don't know. I think it's kind of fun to just, if you don't remember someone, I think that's also fine. Like if I mention Kodiak and you don't know who Kodiak is, it's not like the end of the world in the story. Like I'm just bringing him up as a brother. That's all you need to know, you know?
So for the books, I know that for like, I keep talking about the lessons, the Fallen Men series, but so when you wrote Lessons of Corruption, did you knew that King was going to have another book?
I did, yes. And
how do you, and I know maybe you're like, I'm not going to say anything, or I won't say, but is there a possibility that we're going to get more books of other couples?
Yeah, people do ask that a lot. I mean, for example, everyone wants another book of Lulu and Zeus. Like that's the yes. I think I get asked that every day. I feel I get asked that. So, you know, what I have to say about that is I am not easy on my characters. They go through not just one thing. They go through a lot of things together. And if you look at specifically Zeus and Lulu, they went through so much together, you know, cancer and, you know, being shot and parental abuse and just all of these things that they went through, that sometimes I feel like saying, listen, you think about this, you take a long, hard think. Do you want them to have another book? Because I will eviscerate them. And I will. Like, that's just the way that I am, you know. King and Cressida got another book. I eviscerated them, you know. So I think for me, I will never tell a story that isn't in my heart to tell. So I would never, and I just, part of me is kind of like, Giana, come on now. Like, you know, from a business point of view, people would totally gobble up another Zeus and Lulu book. But I'm not going to tell that if it's not in me to give, because why would I ever want to ruin Zeus and Lulu? The book has to be organic. It has to be going somewhere. I have to have a story to tell and a point to make with their story. So my point is, I love a lot of the Fallen Men characters, and like I would love to see them again. Every time I get to write about them, even just cropping up in another book, I'm freaking thrilled because I love them all. They're my babies. But I would say that it's not going to be a trend, couples getting 2 books or 3 books. I'm not saying that it's not going to happen, but I would say like definitely it's not something to expect. because there's a lot of cool stories to tell in the Fallen Men still. Even, you know, with kids potentially one day. So I think there's already so much to tell that it's not necessary to continue to focus on characters that have already had their time to shine and already had their happily ever after. But you will, the cool thing is you see them again, and you see, you get to check in, and like Zeus and Lulu are a factor in literally every single Fallen Men book. You see them, both of them, multiple times. Zeus always has a role. He's Zeus. He's in charge. He's the patriarch. He cares about everyone in his family, everyone in his Fallen MC family. So you still get to see them, but I don't think it's necessary for couples to necessarily have a full 100,000+ word book, because that's how big my books are, you know?
And it's funny because I think so many readers love Zeus and want more Zeus. Like when we asked for questions, we got so many for Zeus.
Yes, I'm not surprised.
Do you think he's your reader's favorite character? Who do you think is, and who's your favorite?
Oh gosh, reader's favorite, hands down, Zeus. Sometimes after Inks and Lies and after Dead Man Walking, well, so I always say Zeus, and he is, but there are diehards for other Fallen Men. Like sometimes you talk to them and they get like savage about it. Like, no, I don't care about Zeus. Like King is number one. Rah! And you're like, whoa, you know, we're all entitled to our own opinion. But yeah, I think Zeus is hands down people's favorite character that I've ever written. I think Elena, actually, from When Heroes Fall, she got a lot of love after When Heroes Fall. People loved her, and I was really happy about that. So maybe for female characters, I think Lulu and Elena are our favorites, but Zeus, hands down, is the favorite. And it's funny for me because it's hard to decide favorites. It's kind of like picking your own between your children, right? It's like, you're not really supposed to do that. And I think my answer does change all the time. Like if you asked me in an hour, it would probably be different. I will say the easier way to answer this question is Zeus and Lulu are not my favorite couple. And the reason they're not my favorite couple is because I almost feel like the readers own them more than I do now. Like I created them, but the hype around them is so intense and people love them so much that I feel like I kind of have a shared custodianship of them with my readers. And so my feelings towards them aren't as passionate or protective because I know that people love them. I know that I don't have to advocate for them. I know I don't have to worry about them. And some of the other characters that don't, like, I often say that Lion Danner and Hurley Rose, like they're my favorite Fallen Men couple because they're pretty underrated and I really love them. And I think I say that because they're underrated and I'm like a mom and I want people to know that like they're loved and that they're supported and that they're important. So it is hard to say who my favorite characters are. I think probably in the Fallen Men, I really love Nova. And I really love King. I don't know who. I think in the Lombardi world, it's a bit easier. Cosima is my favorite. Probably Cosima and Elena. I love both of them. And I love Dante a lot. Dante and Zeus have a lot of similarities, though, I think, in that they're both badasses who could actually break a man apart with their bare hands, which is obviously incredibly sexy. I find it incredibly sexy. But then for their loved ones, they are just so soft and so romantic. And so I think the contrast between a man who is so physical and raw and masculine, but then who also isn't afraid of his feelings is the best kind of combination. And that's what Zeus and Dante both have, is they're badass guys who run massive criminal organizations that you think would be horrible people, but they're so not horrible. They're so loving and they're so open and like non-judgmental. And I love those two heroes for that contrast that they have within themselves.
When you wrote Zeus' book, did you expect the readers to absolutely fall in love with him as they did, or did that take you by surprise? Because I do think I see a lot, like every review I see, it's I love Zeus, I love Zeus, I love Zeus. And I'm like, I think that's like, has to be her top one.
Yeah, no, it's 100%. He's the top. Well, as I said before, I write my books for me. So I'm not thinking about my readers when I'm writing. I don't like, maybe it sounds like kind of mean, but I'm writing the story that I have to write with the characters that come to me. So I'm not sitting there like, will my readers love it if this happens? Sometimes I'm actually like, oh crap, I don't think my readers will like it if this happens. But I have to tell the story I have to tell. So when I was writing Welcome to the Dark Side, is actually a very interesting story because I actually wrote that in like a 2.5 week period on a road trip through Scotland and Ireland with my best girlfriend. And I was writing in the car. I was writing in the hostels. I was writing like at one point we were staying in Galway and I got strep throat because I wasn't sleeping because I was writing Welcome to the Dark Side. And I was staying up all night and it was just the clickety clack of my keys you could hear in the hostel room. And I think I was writing like 20 hours a day. So I wrote it in like a 2.5 week period. I was not thinking of what my readers were going to think about this book. If anything, I worried that people were going to hate it because it was a 19-year age gap. The heroine was 17 years old. The hero was a criminal, a murderer. So I definitely thought, if anything, it was going to have a negative reception. And I remember sending it to a beta reader, Michelle Clay, and she said to me, this book is going to change your life. And I was like, what? Wait, really? Oh, whatever. Like, ha 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 ha. You're just being biased and you're sweet. And then it did. It really did. Zeus definitely with Lessons in Corruption kind of took off, and there was a lot of hype around that. But with Welcome to the Dark Side, I didn't know what I was doing still. And it was in the top 100 on Amazon when it released. I was like, what is this? I don't even know what I'm doing. And I think there was something magical about that story and about Zeus that it resonated with people so much. And I'm really grateful for that. And I think a lot of people would like it if I just kept writing Zeus-like characters. But I can't do that because that's just not me. And I just think that would be boring. But I am very appreciative for people's response to Zeus. And I was definitely shocked. And I think I'm still shocked and humbled every single day by how much people love Zeus. It's very cool and very rewarding and hard to believe still, like however 3 years later.
So from all of your couples, which one is most like is similar to you and your man?
Oh, okay. Well, that's a really good question. Okay, so I think my man, he'd probably say he's most like Daniel Sinclair. I think he's most like Lionel Danner. He's also a little bit like Dante in that like everyone likes him. He's very charming and very like seems like one thing, but then when you get to know him, you're like, whoa, you're like a lot more dark and edgy than I thought you were. And I think that I'm the most like probably Cosima and Elena, maybe Lila thrown in there. But then together, I think probably Lion and Harley Rose were the most like maybe. I don't know. It's funny. People in my personal life, they're like, I want to read your books, but I don't want to read about your sex life with your partner. Like, first of all, I am not that egotistical that every book I write is some iteration of my life. Like, come on. Second of all, my life is boring compared to the books that I write. Trust me. Like, I wish I was in a car chase. Okay. I wish I, was saving people's lives. I'm not doing that. So, I always kind of, for me, writing is a very personal journey, but it's not personal because it's at all about me or my life. Obviously, my life informs things. Like Welcome to the Dark Side, I wrote it after my dad. I lost my dad to cancer, and my mom had cancer in the last 10 years 4 times. So that element was super important to me and super personal. But I didn't have cancer like Lulu, and I didn't have, I might take elements, but they're not even that connected to my personal experience in life. Because when I was little, I tried to keep a journal, a diary, and I could never do it because I was like, my life's boring compared to what's in my head. So my books are not really informed that much, I would say, by my personal life. I love both, but they don't really have that much of an intersection, and I like it that way.
Would you ever write a different genre than the one you're writing right now? Because I know you do dark mafia and you do MC. Will you ever write anything other than that?
Oh, totally. I also think it's kind of funny. I was saying this to a friend the other day. I am not a dark person. Like, I'm pretty happy and, you know, bubbly. Like, if you ever follow me on Instagram, most of the time I'm like happy and smiling and doing fun things. You know, I'm not a super dark person. And I write dark romance. But the thing is, I want to write everything. I am interested in everything. So yeah, you know, I guess, like, I wrote the Fallen Men series and as a motorcycle club romance, but I didn't even think it was dark. I also don't think I have a great gauge of what's dark. Like, I remember writing Enthralled, which is very dark. And I was like, this one's pretty dark. And people were like, whoa, this is the darkest book I've ever read. And I was like, oh, crap. Okay, I didn't know that. So I think for me, again, like, it's not so much about what the subject matter is that I'm drawn to. It's about the stories I have to tell. So let's just look at my 65 plus ideas that I'm waiting to write. I have dark romance to write, but I also have sports romance. I've been an athlete my whole life, and I cannot wait to write sports romances, which just aren't going to be as dark. I've got, next year I'm writing my male, male, female Hollywood romance trilogy. That's not dark. You know, so I do definitely, and I feel like the Lombardi world, obviously the enslaved duet's dark. And I guess When Heroes Fall and When Villains Rise is dark, but the evolution of sin isn't dark. It's just angsty. So I think for me, it will always probably be one of two things: dark and or forbidden. I think that's more what I'll gravitate towards. And I would write PNR, I would write fantasy, I would write suspense. I have a suspense romance I want to write. It doesn't really matter what the genre is. But it'll probably be forbidden or dark, just because I like to push like societal boundaries. And that's what drives me as an author, if that makes sense. So like any trope is fine.
And how do you pick what you're going to write next? Because you said you have like 65 ideas. How do you go in there and say, okay, I'm writing this next? Like, how do you pick from all of those?
Oh gosh, it's so hard, honestly. I actually just sat down, I think yesterday or the day before, and I planned my schedule for next year. And I'm not the kind of person that normally does that. Like, I just write what I write, and it comes out when it comes out, and that's the way that it is. But I had to, because I'm doing hopefully a lot next year. And I was like, if I'm not organized, it's not going to work. And I think I would love, because I'm such an artist, not a business person sometimes, I would love to just write whatever I want to write. Sometimes I have an idea that comes to me and I'm like, I just want to write this right now. I want to go for it. And I did that with Dead Men Walking. Dead Men Walking came to me in a dream, and I was like, I have to write this right now. I'm not writing When Heroes Fall. I'm writing Dead Men Walking. But in general, it's not the smartest idea to do that for your readers who have expectations, especially as you have books in your back catalog. For me, I have the Fallen Men series, which is ongoing and which is very popular. So I have to produce Fallen Men books. I want to, but it also just makes sense for me to, because I get asked literally every single day, multiple times, when the next Fallen Men book's coming. So not only do I want to write it, but if my readers are really asking for it that badly, I don't want to disappoint them. I want to give them a Fallen Men book. So that's something that I keep in mind. Like, I took a break this year from writing the Fallen Men, because I produced 3 last year and I needed a little bit of a break. But every year from next year on, I'll have at least one Fallen Men book come out, because I love that world. It's like home for me, and it's also like home for my readers. So I don't want to keep them from it for too long. Otherwise, I had this Lombardi world going on, and I kind of wanted to close that out before I started new stuff, because as I said before, I really like books that interconnect, and I kind of always will have that. And I didn't want to start like 6 different interconnecting things at once and leave people kind of hanging in weird ways. I kind of like the rounding it out. So with next year, with Sebastian's book, I'll be done writing the Lombardi world books. And then I can start something new, like a new series or a new whatever. So that's kind of how I try to do it, is kind of in rounds of series or rounds of themes that I can write around that make sense for me and also make sense for my readers. So that's how I decide.
Can you give us a little hint of the next Fallen Men?
Okay, I can give you a hint. Let's think about it. Okay, so I will say that I had a poll on Instagram the other day asking for people's guesses about who Fallen Man book 7 would be about. And I will say that most people got it very wrong. So, you know me, I like to subvert expectations. I don't like to do what you guys think I'm going to do. So that is something to keep in mind. I think I'm excited about the next book in the Fallen Man. It's very Fallen Man subject matter. It's an age gap. I think it will be surprising in some ways. I will say that the heroine is quite going to be maybe a bit of a surprise. And I'm really excited to write it. But that's all I guess I can really say, because I'm a tease. I will say it will come out. It will be the first book that I publish in 2022. So it will be out in like the winter, spring area, because I don't want to keep people waiting too long, and I'm excited to get back to the Fallen Men world. But yeah, there's more stuff to come in the Fallen that maybe, like, I love male-male romances, and I love male-male-female romances, and you might see some of that. You might see a female-female romance in there. So it is one of those things, I'll tell you guys, it is one of those things with having a popular series. I have to write what I have to write, but I am aware that people are very proprietary almost about the Fallen Men. They have their own opinions on what should happen, when it should happen, and how it should happen. And so it does become a little bit scary as an author, because there's so many expectations built around that world that it could be easy to feel apprehensive about writing the Fallen Men, because people are so opinionated and intense about it. And that's not a bad thing. That's a beautiful thing. But it is kind of a weight that you have on your shoulders as you continue writing a popular series. Like, you know, you are inevitably, especially with the way I write, going to let someone down. And that's just kind of something you have to get used to.
Okay, maybe we should move on from the Fallen Men to the Lombardi world. So let's talk a little bit about When Heroes Fall, because I've mentioned it a lot of times. I've never looked at Elena as a villain. She's always been this broken woman that I empathize her. Like, I feel bad for her. So I've never looked at her as the villain. Like some people, I know I've saw some comments of they say they hated her and that she was so mean, but I've never looked at her that way. And I seriously think she's become my favorite heroine from you. Like, I love Cressida so much, but I think Elena took over. Like, she's seriously the Ice Queen, and I love her so much. And
that makes me so happy.
And Dante, I remember saying, I do not like Dante. I don't care about Dante.
I remember you saying that too.
Yes, I didn't care about Dante because I was like, I loved Alexander. So I was like, how dare Dante?
I love that.
But I ended up loving Dante so much. And I don't know if I can't pick if I love Dante more or Alexander more, but you seriously did an amazing job on When Heroes Fall, and I can't wait to read the conclusion of their love story.
Oh, I can't wait to give it to everyone. It's every book is personal, and every book is important that you write. It's part of your soul that you're just putting out there for people to consume and judge. So obviously it's a very intense experience, but with Dante and Elena, it's so personal. It was such an intense journey to write, because I've been writing the Lombardi family since I was 16, essentially. And it was the first series or world that I published. It's also less popular than the Fallen Men series. And so it's kind of like even more personal to me, because it's my baby that doesn't get as much love. So there was all that. And then there's the fact that Dante was kind of a villainous character in the Enslaved Duet, and Elena was the villainous character in the Evolution of Sin. And so I was protective of them as the villains. Like, for me, I obviously always knew that they weren't villainous. I knew that they had a story to tell. But when you, as an author, when you decide to give two villains a love story, there's obviously some anxiety that people are going to be like, well, no, I hate them. I don't want to read this. And to kind of stick to their guns and not like them. So I was a bit nervous, and I was just a bit protective, like mama bear, about them, especially about Elena, because for me, I feel like Elena, what I did actually when I was young was I kind of took myself and I split myself into two. Things that I really was happy about myself, enjoyed, my confidence, like characteristics I thought were good in myself. And I took characteristics I thought were bad in myself. And I amplified those both, but I gave the good ones to Cosima and I gave the bad ones to Elena. And I mean, I'd say traditionally bad. Like she also got my ambition and my drive and things like that too. She did get good things, but she was harder. You look at Cosima and you're like, she's beautiful. She's amazing. I love her. And you look at Elena and you're like, ooh, don't really want to get too close to her. She might snap my fingers off. And so I was nervous with her that people wouldn't like her. She'd been a villain before. I also think understandably so. I mean, what happened to her was horrific and just the worst betrayal ever. But I was nervous. And so I can't even express how gratifying it was to see that people love Elena after reading When Heroes Fall. And I was also nervous because it's a slow burn. I normally don't write slow burns. And this is like very slow burn. But it was the only way I could tell the story because Elena had so many issues, mental and physical, that kept her from her sexuality and from accepting her connection with Dante for a long time. And so I had to write it that way. So all of these things coalesced to me being like, oh my God, this could probably bomb. So I was very happy, amazingly overjoyed when people liked both of them. And the cool thing, I'm really excited for When Villains Rise, because in When Heroes Fall, I basically raised Elena to the ground. I was like, Elena, here you are. Here's who you think you are. Dante is going to smash into you and break you into pieces. And from those pieces, from those ashes, she is going to rise in When Villains Rise. And so that book is really fun because I've done all the hard work taking her down to the studs. And now you get to see how she evolves into this new kind of happier and more powerful woman. And that's a really fun, I love writing evolution. I love writing people who change in a book because of love, but also for other circumstances. Change is beautiful. We should always be evolving. And it's never too late. Elena's 27. She thinks her life is set. It's not set. Her whole life has changed by the end of When Heroes Fall. And that's fun to see how people who are set in their ways can change and do change. And what events lead them there. So yeah, I really am excited to give When Villains Rise because Dante and Elena become a very badass power couple in that story.
I know, because it's supposed to be coming out in what, 2 weeks? Kind of 2 weeks. So what can you tell us? What are we gonna see in that book? Like, what can we expect from Elena and Dante?
Okay. Well, so at the end of When Heroes Fall, spoilers, obviously, they are fleeing New York and they go to Italy. They go to Naples, where Elena was born and raised, and she hates Naples and she hates Italy. She hates everything about her childhood. She hates everything about her homeland. She, worked really hard to get rid of her Italian accent even. She doesn't eat Italian food. She tries to stay very far away from her roots. So they're going back. Also, Dante lived in Naples, and that was where he became Dante. He went from Edward Davenport, the second son of a duke in England, to Dante Salvatore, a mafioso. So that's the place of his birth in a sense as well, into this new iteration of himself. So they're going to the Lion's Den. They're going to the heart of the Camorra, the mafia family. And they're fleeing there for safety, but the second they get there, things kind of blow up. And there's a lot of stuff they have to deal with, a lot of different power dynamics, because in New York, Dante is the head honcho, but in Naples, he is not the head honcho. So kind of like a third of the book is in Italy. and they return to the States. And you'll see a lot of loose ends tied up. You figure out what's going on with Bambi and Aurora. I will say there are 2 weddings in When Villains Rise, which you can kind of take that as you will, but there are 2 in When Villains Rise. And it's just really about the story for me, this duet is about kind of realizing who you are and that your flaws aren't shameful, and that things that you think about yourself that are bad can be seen as good by other people. It's really a story of acceptance, and you really, by the end of When Villains Rise, you see 2 people who have been villainized their entire life and also been isolated their entire life, form a really intense and beautiful family. And that's kind of where this duet was going, and kind of where a lot of my stories go. I think just falling in love with yourself is one of the hardest things you do in your life, and it can take forever, and it's a journey that you never stop taking. And also, like, found family themes are really big for me. I think sometimes, you're born into a certain family, but that doesn't mean they have to be your only family. And sometimes the connections that you make, like you two, you guys are found family. You discovered each other, you have a connection, and you foster that, and it brings joy to your life. And there's something really special about that, because you are making the conscious decision to form that connection, to maintain that connection. And that theme is really important to me. And you also see that in the Anti-Heroes in Love duet. Elena's family she's very close with. Dante's not super close with his family. But you see that together they take some villains, the typically villainous people, and they create a really beautiful family that to each other, they're not villains. They're the heroes. They're the loved ones. They're worth fighting for. And that's kind of the whole theme there.
So you said ARCs go out today, right?
No, not yet. I'm very excited for them to go out, and I'm really excited for the boxes to go out. There's some really cool things. You guys can see this is one of the things in the boxes.
Oh, that is so cute. Right? I love that.
I know, it's like very, very emblematic of the series, I feel. So it's just a cute
I love that.
Yeah.
And I do want to say that I loved how you said that about your books, because I do feel, and I see that a lot in your books too, where each book, it is fiction, but it does have a little bit of truth in it, to where it's like, blood doesn't make you family. Your friends make you family. You find family in, maybe the last places you thought you would find family. And I've said this before, I think books also give us that little push to make us want to do stuff that maybe we're scared to do. So I do read some of the books, and it's like, I do think behind, even if it's fiction, I mean, I'm not saying like a mafia book, it's like, oh man, I'm going to do this, blah, blah, blah. But if you see the story behind that, to where they're getting strength and they're, building a family out of friendships and stuff. And that's something that I love to read, because it's true. It's like me and Ping, we met 3 years ago, and we talk every single day.
I love
after that. So it's like, it's true. I think every book, and for you, The Fallen Men, I like how you did for Lenses of Corruption. It's like you gave her a family in the last place she expected to find a family. And I think she even says it there when, they're helping her with, I think, is it her house, and Zeus is talking to her, and she's like, she found this friend that she never thought she would find. And I love reading that in your books. So it's like, you're growing with them, and you're seeing them find their family, and you're like, it's true. It's like you find happiness, family, and joy on things outside of your comfort zone, like they do in the books.
And that is exactly what I try to do, because I think a lot of the time, there's even a quote in When Heroes Fall, Dante's talking, and he's saying, like, a lot of the time people base their happiness on other people's expectations and, like social mores, what's socially acceptable. but we should be basing our happiness on what makes us happy. And that often can defy what we're taught to admire or do. And so that's what I really love to do in my books, is show that all kinds of relationships, not even romantic relationships, but friendships, mentorships, whatever, they can be found in the most unlikely spots. And I think that those can be the most profound, because your connection is so deep that it actually transcends all of those things, all of those expectations, all of those judgments that you used to have. Like with Cressida, she was the perfect way to start the series, because she has all these preconceived notions about her life. She was taught by very traditional, stuffy parents to be a certain way. And then she meets this guy and they have this instant connection, but she doesn't understand it because she doesn't like anything about him. Like, she's not meant to like anything about him. And that's kind of where the beauty is, because she actually ends up learning from someone who she thinks is so different from her. But if you connect with someone, no matter how different you are, there's a shared space there, and you can learn so much from that person because they're so different from you. And that is such a powerful relationship to have. And I think it's really life-changing. And that's why I write about it so much, because we keep ourselves from potentially amazing connections. Because of what? Because society says you shouldn't be friends with someone that's that much older than you. You shouldn't date someone that's that much older than you, or you shouldn't, like a criminal, or for whatever reason. We set these cages around ourselves and certain things. And what happens when those all go away? The world is so much more your oyster, and you can have so many more experiences and learn so much more about yourself. And I think learning about yourself makes you happier, because you know what you actually desire and what you actually want to expect from yourself and others.
Yeah, and I love how you write, because I will tell you this, I feel like every book, your characters say some stuff that you're like, ooh, that touched me. And it's like the way you word things, it's very truthful, even though they're going through some situations, but the way you write them and the way they say stuff, it's very touching. It's very real. It's very poetic. And is that something, and that's what I was going to ask you, is that something that you plan on doing, or is that something that just comes out as you're writing it?
That's actually a really interesting thing, because when I was first writing romance, I was a bit concerned, because I had been writing in my spare time, or as a hobby, I was writing literary fiction, which is typically like much heavier on the poetic prose and on themes and symbols and just that sort of thing. And so I was quite nervous, going into, like, I just read 50 Shades of Grey, which isn't like that at all, and so I was worried that my voice wasn't right. So I actually even tried to kind of change it or pare it down so it wasn't so everything that you just said. And it was really hard for me, because, as I said, I black out when I write. So it was not really working. I couldn't really change it. And so I just thought, okay, well, I'll just go with it and we'll see if anyone likes it. And if not, then, I tried. And it's funny, because even now, lots of people will be like, I love the way that you write. It's really beautiful. It really resonates with me.
It's very unique, because you don't see that on many books. So for me, it's very, very unique.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate that. Like, I think it's really cool that I feel like if you pick up a Giana Darling book, it's a Giana Darling book. Like, you can tell that I wrote it because it's my voice. And I also like that, because I feel like someone could write the same subject matter as me, but it would be different because my voice says it differently. And I really love that. But it's funny, because it is unique and lots of people don't like that. Sometimes I have reviews that are like, I had one the other day, and it was like, just say the word blue, don't say cerulean, like the sea or something, like, say blue. And I was like, totally fair. Like, I could just say blue, she has yellow hair and blue eyes. I could say that, but instead I'm going to say she has hair like spun moonbeams, pulled down from the sky. And that's just what I do. That's what I love. I love language. I love writing things in interesting ways. And that's just like, it's so fun for me, and it's so organic for me. And that's just how I have to do it. And lots of people don't like it. Like, there are lots of people who don't like that. They don't want their romance novels to be like that. They don't maybe want their books to be like that. Some people think that I like am trying too hard, or that I, don't need to have it be like that. Like sometimes for the Fallen MC too, they're like, it doesn't need to be poetic. Like it's about a motorcycle club. Why would you use prose like that? And for me, I'm like, okay, fair. Like you don't have to read it then. This is something about me, like me, my writing, Giana Darling, that will always be, because that is what I do and how I do it. And I don't know how to stop. And so I'm very grateful that some people like it, like you. The fact that you think it's beautiful and unique just makes my heart sing, because it's a very personal voice. It's my voice. And I have tried to change it and I can't. So it's just kind of the reality of me. And if people, like, we're talking about bad reviews, if they don't like that, then that's okay. And I understand that. It is unique. It's not normal. So if you don't like it, that's okay. But for people who do, it means so much to me that they do, because that's me.
I think from the books I already read, I know what how you're writing now. I know your voice. So that's what I want from your books, because you're being you and you're still doing you.
I appreciate that, because it is something that, I don't know. I think, and also as my books, more people are reading my books. Some people pick up the first book and they're like, this was like too much. I didn't enjoy this, because it was just too prosy or poetic or whatever. There's too many metaphors, or I don't know. And it's something that like I do think about sometimes, of, okay, well, this person didn't like it. So then, because when you get criticism, you obviously check in with yourself and you're like, should I change this? And it's something that I don't want to change, because that's what I love about writing. I love that, Zeus can talk like a badass biker dude with like his crazy slang and swearing every 2 words, but in his heart, he sees the world in such a beautiful way. And I think that's possible. I think a lot of people do think that. And I'm articulating what's going on in someone's head. And yeah, sometimes we're not sitting there being like, the wall is eggshell like the sun, and like obviously, but sometimes we have these intangible wordless feelings about something. Like you see a sunset and you might not describe the sunset in your mind to yourself, but you're moved in such a way that I'm trying to write about the way that moves you. And so for me, I should write that in a beautiful way, because you're moved in a beautiful way by it. You know what I mean? And that's kind of why I really love to do that in my books, and why I think that even a biker can have a really poetic soul, because everyone experiences life differently, but we're all moved by beauty. And I think that if I'm writing about something that is supposed to move someone, it should be written beautifully, because it's a beautiful sensation, if that makes sense.
Yes, I agree.
Well, thank you.
I seriously think all of your books are very poetic. So you just continue doing you, and if they don't like it, who cares? Because I seriously think the way how you write is very beautiful, and I love it.
Thank you. That really means that just means everything to me, because there was a TikTok video I saw the other day and I was so moved by it. Someone said that they'd seen Welcome to the Dark Side on TikTok a bunch, and it was always, they were talking about steam, like it was one of the steamiest, spiciest books on Book Talk. And she said, why is no one also talking about like the poignancy of this? Like it made me cry, and it's beautifully written. And I was so touched by that, because for me, like I love writing sex scenes. I love the eroticism, and I love sexuality. So my books will always have that. And I think that's an important part of it. But I love when people say like, it was well written, or like the story was so good, because I think that romance a lot of the time gets kind of slandered for like not being well written and not having a good story. But I think there's tons of romance books that are fabulous in every single way. And we shouldn't like negate them just because they're romance books. Romance is at the heart of a lot of different stories that don't call themselves romances, and love is really what drives us in life. Romance, but also like platonic love, which is also a lot of the time in romance stories very prevalently. So I am always really happy when I have like compliments that are about the good plot or the beautiful writing, because I do hope that my books are, transcend just being about sex or just being about, romance. So thank you.
So before we let you go, we know that you are writing a duet for the Midnight Dynasty in the fall or the winter.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit hint about it? Because I am dying to know which character you're going to write for.
Yes, I can. Okay, so it's a very typical Giana subject matter. It is a forbidden romance. It's an age gap, and it's dark. I'm writing about a tortured, brooding, dangerous member of the Morelli family. And he has an idea to hurt the Constantine family. And the heroine is an integral part of his master plan. So that is what I will say about that.
That already sounds so good.
Oh, good. I hope so. I love it. I've already started writing it. They're really fabulous. It's just very fun for me. It's one of those things where I get a little nervous. The heroine's quite young. I would say it's kind of like a more Lulu Zeus age gap kind of situation, / it's that level of forbidden. It's quite intense. So I always get a little bit nervous, but also so excited because it's so much fun to write that dynamic. And it's fun to write men who have no idea what love is, and then they find the right person. And that's kind of what this Morelli character goes through. He has no idea about being nice or loving people. And this woman brings a lot of joy and kindness and love to his life. So it's going to be really fun. I can't wait. It is going to come out in the fall, and it's a duet, and I cannot wait. I'm really excited about sharing it. It's going to be cool to talk about it a little bit more after When Villains Rise come out.
Well, thank you for being with us today. I had so much fun talking to you.
You guys are the best. I was so thrilled when you invited me to come on. I love listening to your podcast, and you guys are just such shining lights in the community. I love your friendship, and I'm really honored you wanted me to come chat with you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And we are so excited for what's to come. And thank you so much for being here. I can't wait for the next Dante book. I'm so excited.
I can't wait either. Yeah, coming on the 30th, so you don't have to wait very long.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Giana, for being with us. We had such an amazing time talking to you about all of your books. We can't wait for your future books. I'm so excited for all of them, and I wish we already got all of them already, but I can't wait for them. And we do have a signed paperback of Enthralled. That's the first book in the Enslaved duet. All you have to do is just follow us on Instagram, Book Buzz Podcast, and follow Giana. Her handle is Giana Darling Author. Just leave a comment of which books of hers is your favorite, and that's it. You're entered in for the giveaway. And once again, thank you, Giana, for letting us interview you. And if you missed our announcement on Monday, our next author interview is Christy, known as Kay Bromberg. And we are going to have a special guest also, Olivia Applegate.
Yay!
She portrayed Riley from the Driven series. So we are going to have them on our podcast. We are so nervous, so excited.
We did add a little post on Instagram where you can submit your questions. So if you have questions for her, because Field, known as Driven Season 2, is coming out soon. So if you have any questions in regards to Field, check it out. And I am going to go out and say, if you haven't read Field and you don't want spoilers, don't watch the podcast, because we're going to be talking all about Field, the book, And I mean, if you haven't read it, it would be spoilerish, I would say. So, but I'm so excited.
Yes, Jen worked really hard for this one, guys.
So make sure you're following us on Instagram, because like I said, we do have a post up where you can submit any questions for Christy or Olivia. And we are also going to be announcing on there when that interview is going to go live. So be on the lookout. Don't miss it. I'm so excited. I'm so nervous. And I've seen Olivia and Christy several times already. So I'm so nervous. I'm so excited. And if you haven't watched it, Passionflix did release the teaser trailer for Field, known as Driven Season 2. So check that out. We are going to add that link to that teaser below. And it's going to be in our Instagram. So go check it out. And we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.